I'm here because I'm practicing a particular technique of conversation in a space that would hopefully allow us to have relaxed but also very important conversation. So that's why I'm here. My other life too is that I'm a parent of a young man with a disability who is an artist, and also work at Queensland University of Technology as a lecturer. My boss is in the room, but also doing my PhD at the moment in curriculum and students with disabilities, which does not make me an expert by any stretch, okay? It's all about the fact we're all learning together in this area. Well, I just wanted to quickly highlight before we start is that for some of us who have just arrived this afternoon, and a bit jealous, I think, that I haven't been here to hear the other conversations, but our conversation comes from a bigger conversation, which is around, and a lot of you highlighted it, the inclusiveness of the whole community, and education is an important area of that community. But our question for today is, how do we create and acknowledge inclusive school communities? And I think the title, Michelle, was something like a tick of acknowledgement. So in a way, we'd like to start a conversation today around what is happening. Because for a lot of, for me included, we've got lots of war stories. We've got lots of stuff around why it hasn't worked or why, etc. And I'm wondering if today we could attempt to try and find things, even if you have to, it sounds negative already, dig really deep, around those things that are considered good practice, that we can acknowledge as heading towards the journey of a truly inclusive school. And some of you will be using your own knowledge, or your knowledge through your children's experiences or neighbours or whatever. So we really would appreciate you sharing, and in a community of support that we're able to share our understandings and stories. So the way we'd like to do it is we'd like to use a particular inquiry approach, if that's all right. If we had more time, we'd actually ask you to help us work out how we're going to do this, but Valmay said, no, we're going to go fast. Right, so I'm going fast. And one of the techniques, if you're interested, because I noticed some of you said you're interested in the actual conversation as well, not just the content. And it's a technique, I guess, of how to arrange the way we have a conversation, and it's called SOAR. And for some of you that are interested, it's based upon appreciative inquiry, which is around looking at where we are and how we're getting it, and in a positive light. So we look at the sorts of things that we're seeing now in terms of acknowledgement, that tick of acknowledgement about what is happening now that we consider inclusive. It's what are the strengths, what can we build upon? There must be something that we can build upon, something that becomes the foundation for us. The opportunity, which is what can we continue to respond with or respond well with. I'm just looking at all the other people who are also practitioners in the area of art posting, so if any of you would like to... No, okay.
We've forgotten it all.
Okay. Aspiration, which is what are we aspiring to achieve? What is it we really want? And the result, how do we know how do we know when we are succeeding? And I think at the point there are places and things that are happening now that are successful, but how do we know that? And how do we continue to monitor that? I'd like to suggest, well not suggest, I'm actually telling you, but anyway, a way of having this conversation. And it's called a World Cafe technique. And cafe, like which we have at the moment, except some of you haven't got a cup of tea, but you're most welcome to go and get a cup of tea, is a conversation around a table. It's a conversation where you're invited to the table when you're at a coffee shop. Well, usually, most of us are.
Are you paying?
Yes, NDS has got the tab.
NDS,
cool, no problem, they got the tab. But so on your tables, and you guys might have to separate. You have a couple of things that you may not see it normally at a cafe, unless you are going to a child-friendly one. And that is a piece of paper, some pens, and also some stuff around cafe etiquette. Now, I don't know about you, my daughter was well trained in cafes and how to behave in a cafe at a very early age. My 24-year-old still doesn't get it, but anyway, that's all right. So the cafe etiquette is there for you to consider how we would like people to participate in that. And it is that it has a focus on, now I can't read because I'll give it to you, a focus on what matters. So for us at the moment is what matters is what is going well. What is happening that we believe is actually truly inclusive now. So we're focusing on that. And so we might, in your roles, in sitting at your cafe table, is that you are invited to contribute your thinking and your experience. It's highly valued. Listen for you to understand, and I heard some people say they're here to listen. Connect ideas between all the organisations even that we have and where you've come from, and listen together for the patterns or the insights or the deeper questions that you may develop from the conversation. And I love the play, doodle, draw. Some people really do like to be able to record what they're doing either on their own pieces of paper or whatever, or you may wish to record your conversation as your group on one of the big pieces of Butcher's paper. That's up to you. The other thing that I would like you to do is that I would like each table to have a host. Now that host stays where they are. You can stay where you are if you want, you don't have to move. But what will happen is that I will pose a question and you as a group can discuss that. The host is just there to help with pencils, go get a cup of tea maybe for you, but also to be involved in the conversation. Okay, starting with SOAR, which was strengths. I would like you to discuss 2 questions. I'm not going to give you a time limit. When we're finished talking, we're finished talking. Okay? And those 2 questions are looking very lopsided. That helped. What are we most proud of? What makes us unique? So what I'm talking about as a community, us here, you, your table. What makes us unique? What can we be best at in our world? All relating back to the inclusiveness of our schools.
So, I mean, you must have some, directly in education, you must have some great examples of being proud. Of things that you're proud of in inclusive education.
I think we could say that we're proud of our changes to how we're preparing teachers to be inclusive. Starting, with teacher training for teachers being prepared in terms of mindset, knowledge and skills. They'd be the 3 things we'd look at. To work inclusively in school.
I just want to add on to Missy's. I think it's not just proud of the resilience of people, but it demonstrates that people outside of other people's situations can become part of it. So people are not just standing back and saying we feel sorry for you. They've got in there and mucked in with the mud. And,
that's right.
And all sorts of things.
Just acknowledge that there are those areas where we are, yes, there have been advances and there is a long way to go in many respects. And so, the stories exist and the pain exists for many people and the experiences exist, but it's that how do we create something different?
Well, I suppose underpinning what I just said, a strength is that the law will uphold a parent's right. Like it has been acted upon. It's not just that the legislation exists, but actually has been acted upon. That even if the principal or the school says something can't, that they can go beyond.
There is a process to it.
So the legislation exists to support the students' rights.
To
inclusive education.
Yeah.
Or to an education of their choice.
support an education of fair choice.
Of their choice.
And that will be all.
Yeah, of fair choice and their choice.
So what makes us unique? What can we be best at in our world?
So across government. Yeah.
That's kind of a little bit harder to get to, really. What makes us unique?
I think uniqueness comes from our passion for the area that we work in, and I think how we can use that to the best ability in our world is to actually share that information. I think we need to understand or not make assumptions that other people out in the community don't want this to happen, don't want the same vision that we want. It might just be that they don't know how to go about it because they don't have the knowledge and skills to be able to see the end vision and actually know how to get there. They may need people like us to actually help them plan those steps and take them along that journey.
So our strengths, we were as a group proud to acknowledge that there are schools that live inclusion and have embraced inclusion, both as a school and their wider community. We thought that another strength was that we all acknowledged that there had been advances in the area of, in terms of understanding what inclusive education is and what it looks like in practice, and that that's happened over time. Another strength was that we were all aware that legislation exists to support inclusion, and I suppose I shouldn't say the but, should I? But we also, I have to say, we also did acknowledge that sometimes that the presence of the legislation didn't always mean that good things happened in schools. However, we thought it was a strength that the legislation is there to support parents and students.
Our resilience in adversity and our optimism that we believe we can bring about change by committing to attendance at forums like this, our communication in our communities to effect change, and our capacity to be accepting of diversity and difference.
Jane? We had the teacher prep at QUT, so you can give that a double tick. And one of the particular things that Suzanne pulled out for us in that was the service learning, where 1,000 students have been to 90 partner organisations. They spend 40 hours, 20 hours? 20 hours with the idea of just basically experiencing diversity. So there are all kinds of different organisations. And we liked the fact that no one who is doing their degree at QUT is allowed to be a beige person. That's working for me. So they're not allowed to be beige.
No beige.
No beige.
Thank you so much for that. And you know what? There's probably more we could add, but I think one of the values of this type of conversation is to see that okay, the world isn't how we want it to be, and certainly there are some authors that say inclusion is a journey. There's never an end point. I don't necessarily know if I side with that, but what I do know is that there is so much we can feel proud of. Because if we don't, we won't move to the next level. We need to be fed by the pride, I think, in what happens. Thank you so much for that. Next question. Opportunity, except for hosts. Thank you, if you could please remain where you are. How do we make sense of what's going on in the broader context? And some of you have already started talking about that, around policy, in how is our society and our community. Before we talked about, I think Jane, your group was talking about how if we educate kids in schools, and that will have an effect on society as a general rule. What about the opposite? What about some of the things in society that are having an effect on what happens in inclusion? And what are the top 3 things we should be focusing on? So think about our strengths or our uniques, things that make us unique. And what are the top 3 things that we should be focusing on that will assist us with an opportunity to keep moving and to keep making it better?
So the broader context is that inclusion, it's on the agenda, and there's a lot of research being done, and there's a lot of evidence already, isn't there? Would that be... Yeah. What else would you say about it?
I'd say one of the big things for us is standards-based reform in national testing.
Oh, of course.
Because all of that is going against trying to be inclusive in some schools. So some schools and some teachers think that it's too hard to be inclusive because there's so much pressure on them to lift school performance, to lift individual performance, which gives them performance on my school website.
My sense of what is going on in the broader context is that we live in a climate where the individual is king, and yet the goal is to get top of the heap and at all costs. And I'm not saying it's how we all act, I think that's the general climate. And so I think it's really hard sometimes to push the inclusion agenda with a focus on the community benefits when we're all doing well to I benefit when I'm doing well. So we have to somehow, so I would, so I think for me that's,
We've done that. Jenny, no, I'm joking. Sorry, no, John and I were having that chat just before we started. Sorry.
yeah. So
So you're not off track at all, you're right on.
That's right. Even just about how, like,
So you
some
would say that
Polynesian cultures, for example,
schools in addressing
they,
diversity
as a culture,
would you put that in that?
the entire family
Would you say
will
that
pitch in and take
is there
care
anything else
of
in that first bit?
kids with disabilities, for example, whereas in our culture it's more like, well, we need to move our kids with disabilities outside of families to other people, you know.
so I think our whole
Can you reckon those three?
Can we just add into that paradigm shift,
Because there's lots of paradigm shifts,
Yes.
aren't there? Like
to
The right one.
to a shared long-term vision, because schools by definition often have short-term visions, and so they can make
politically.
yeah, they can make decisions that are good for them in the short term, but families often have to live with the long-term consequences of those decisions. So
Of inclusivity?
yes, yeah. So a long-term vision of inclusion.
We had like Suzanne brought up. I'll just refer back so that you know what we're talking about this potential conflict between the standards, policy around standards, and policy around inclusivity, and that
Competing things.
potentially competing because they don't have to be, and you should know that, Jenny. So to support people in support schools to build skill building around encompassing the two. And we had, and this might be related to your paradigm shift, was investing resources in awareness raising and transformation, and this was around all of the instruments and strategies, so the UN Convention on the Rights of Children and the UN Convention on the Rights of People with Disability and the National Disability Strategy and the 10-year plan.
3 indicators? Because something would be good, that gives us then something tangible to take away with us about how you can measure inclusivity in schools. And there are some huge strategies, techniques and tools, but for us as a community, what do we think they are? It's around how do we create and that how does it, going back to the big question, what does it take to create a genuinely inclusive community? One of the indicators would be that every community has an inclusive school. It's not about having to drive past 7 schools to get to the school that meets your child's needs. It's about that every school is inclusive. So the next step is every community has an inclusive school, but eventually we get to there's no word for it.
No, well, number 2 is as Millie suggested, we want to eradicate special schools as Senator Sue Waters.
I was going to say.
That's interesting.
I think that that's like no, it's 5 past 5, and nobody really cares what I think. But
yes, we do.
But is that until mainstream schools are genuinely inclusive schools, that parents have the right to put their children to have their children in an educational setting that is safe. At the very least safe. And, we could argue about this all day, but where we got to from that, and I was sitting here with Suzanne, and I'm damn sure she'd disagree with me, where we got to from that was that 2 things, when enrolments in special school drop, and when but more accurate indicator would be when transfers from mainstream schools to special schools drop. So that's when the experience doesn't fail.
So this is going to...
Part of what you're saying though too is that when we get to the point where we actually value differences, that we see difference as a resource rather than something we should...
Like diversity, genetic diversity, we see that as a resource.
So what we need, all of us, let's face it, every single one of us have fallen short, whether it's been in terms of disability or race, gender, we've all had faux pas. And allowing people that's okay. If you don't know, ask a question. And often things happen not because of it's a lack of thought rather than a lack of heart from a lot of people. And I think if you can say,
is too
look,
much hard.
yes, in the same way as that I respect your journey with special education, etc., but allowing to have that dialogue. And yeah,